Jack Collins, a former Navy SEAL, now works as a freelance operative for the CIA under the guise of Executive Solutions. But he still struggles with his past demons, taking medication to control his PTSD. Amidst the bustling Moroccan market, I secretly received mission orders from a CIA operative and returned to my apartment. There, I learned my latest target was a heavily guarded businessman who would soon arrive at the airport and had to be eliminated before reaching his hotel. After wrestling with another bout of PTSD, I prepared my weapons and my mind for the upcoming mission. The target quickly landed in Morocco, and I was there, keeping a close eye on him. But two Moroccan agents were watching me. They knew I was with the CIA and started tailing me. Following closely behind, I hacked the target's phone and heard him reveal the name of a CIA mole to someone. At that moment, the Moroccan agents opened fire on me, but I immediately swerved hard. I managed to get ahead of them, abandoned my car, and ran on foot, with the agents hot on my heels. I managed to steal another car and reach the hotel where the target had just arrived. Then, I hacked the car's system, set a timed lock on the doors, and casually walked up, eliminating the target just before the doors locked again, and vanished from the scene. I drove to a remote hangar to meet my CIA contact, Lee. I thought the CIA was sidelining me, but now I knew they had a top priority target to eliminate. I boarded the plane and met former Marine Mike Brennan. Our relationship was both friendly and tense, as Mike Brennan constantly needled me about my PTSD and my medication. Lee explained that we had 12 hours to take down the target, who was at the top of the president's kill list, and she needed us to put aside our differences to get the job done. Mike Brennan reminded her that he usually worked alone, but Lee said it was either take the mission or get out. Joining the team was Pete Samuelson, a former operative who claimed to be the best. As I grappled with PTSD in the bathroom, Mike Brennan questioned why Lee chose a mentally unstable war addict like me, especially with my wife having just given birth. But Lee thought they needed me and that everyone had to make sacrifices. I went back. Lee then revealed our target was former CIA operative Terry McKnight, who had tipped off the Taliban and gotten many of their men killed. For this reason, the CIA wanted him dealt with. However, Pete Samuelson had heard that the CIA had disavowed McKnight when his identity was exposed, but Lee ignored this. She continued to show us McKnight's legitimate security detail, and I recognized one of them, Tony Dayton, my former Marine Corps comrade. Mike Brennan thought I should pull out of this one, but I didn't believe Tony Dayton was involved in anything that was going on. We then saw McKnight meeting with one of his subordinates on a boat. He had discovered from my first target that this man was in fact a CIA operative. And while the man tried to deny it, McKnight threatened his family unless he gave up a name. To save his own life, the man revealed Lee's name, but McKnight still killed him. Lee and the team quickly headed to London. While the others geared up, I contacted Tony Dayton, setting up a meeting. On the way, Mike Brennan started needling me about my family again, saying the CIA didn't care about me and I should go home. We arrived at a pub where Tony Dayton was waiting, and I introduced him to the team. After a round of beers and reminiscing, I showed him a photo of Hassan, an associate of McKnight's. Tony Dayton explained that he had helped Hassan move to London, but didn't know if he was involved in anything else. We wanted to speak with Hassan, but Tony Dayton was hesitant, as the CIA wanting to speak with him could mean nothing good. But I assured him we just wanted to talk, and were even willing to pay. With Pete Samuelson driving, Tony Dayton led us to the area where Hassan was located. But as soon as the car stopped, Tony Dayton suddenly attacked Pete Samuelson and got out of the car. Mike Brennan and I drew our guns and pursued, but Tony Dayton had ambushed us in time with other gunmen. Tony Dayton stabbed Mike Brennan multiple times, and then finished him off with a fatal knife thrust to the neck. Pete Samuelson rushed in, firing covering shots, and both of us tactically retreated from the alley before speeding away. Mike Brennan's death devastated me, and I wanted Pete Samuelson to retreat before he also got killed, but Pete blamed me for Mike's death. Lee handed over command to Pete, because I had clearly lost my composure, and when Pete Samuelson asked about Mike Brennan's share of the money, I lunged at him until everyone pulled me off. Lee then warned both of them not to ruin her operation, or else. Tony Dayton was angry with his men for spoiling the ambush. Now he knew he would have to face the CIA to protect his investment, but he was not worried because he had a plan. His investment turned out to be McKnight, as Tony Dayton was his head of security, warning about the CIA hit squad that was hunting them. McKnight knew about my and Tony Dayton's past in the military, but Tony Dayton said that was a long time ago, and he wouldn't hesitate to take me down if necessary. Lee found the location of Tony Dayton's TJD security office and passed the information to Pete Samuelson, who was on the road with me. While Tony Dayton was moving McKnight to another location, he asked about my contact, Lee. It turned out that McKnight and Lee had a grudge. Lee blamed him for killing her father, and therefore she was extremely dangerous. They soon arrived at a boat to set up operations. I called Tony Dayton, who was now heading back to the road. Tony Dayton said Mike Brennan's death was just business, but I swore I would send him to his grave. Tony Dayton warned me to go home to see my children, but I have no intention of turning back now. I wonder what made Tony Dayton change, but he was tired of being used by the government, and it was time for him to look out for himself. Pete Samuelson and I went to the TJD security office location. Masked and armed, we broke into the office, but Tony Dayton saw us through the camera and started to make his way back. Once inside the office, Pete Samuelson placed a bomb under the desk. As we were leaving, we found Tony Dayton approaching, so Pete detonated the office as we neared and disappeared. Pete Samuelson also taunted Tony Dayton with a message, and he used it to locate us. But this turned out to be a trap set by Pete Samuelson and myself, where we intended to lure him and his men into a kill zone established by Lee, where a team was already waiting. Pete Samuelson and I planned to attack the building with the goal of separating Tony Dayton from his men and taking him alive. Tony Dayton realized he was being led into a trap, but he intended to use sheer numbers to overwhelm the CIA. Lee began surveying the building from a drone as soon as Pete Samuelson and I arrived, encountering only 2 other CIA agents there and beginning to arm themselves for the upcoming fight. Tony Dayton and his men quickly arrived at the location, armed and on their way with orders to kill everything that moved. Lee informed his men about the approaching convoy. Inside, Pete Samuelson, myself, and the CIA agents were ready for the ambush and began advancing towards Tony Dayton and his men. Tony Dayton spotted Pete Samuelson and me moving in the shadows, and he and his men accelerated towards our position. As soon as they were in range, the 2 CIA agents threw a flashbang grenade and initiated the attack, creating an opening for Pete Samuelson and me to grab Tony Dayton. The 2 CIA agents tried to hold off the rest of them for a while, but they were quickly overwhelmed and killed. Pete Samuelson and I hadn't gone far before we were caught up and attacked by the mob, which gave Tony Dayton an opportunity to escape. But I managed to lay down covering fire before making my escape with the wounded Pete Samuelson. He thought I should leave him, and I told him I had considered it. We made our way out, where I attached tracking devices to all of the vehicles. Our car was gone, forcing us to continue on foot. As Tony Dayton emerged, he sent one of his men back to McKnight. Then, he used the phone of one of the deceased CIA agents to contact Lee. He taunted her that 2 CIA agents were dead and that I and Pete Samuelson would be next, but Lee said that he had been exposed. However, she wanted to make a deal with him because people can be replaced, but opportunities cannot. I stole a car. Inside, I found a child's car seat and sat there in a daze until Pete Samuelson snapped me out of it. As we drove, Pete Samuelson was still sore from the bullet that hit his vest, but he thanked me for saving his life, and we bumped fists. He checked the trackers and found a vehicle heading for the docks, guessing that was where McKnight was hiding. We tried to contact Lee, but she was having a clandestine meeting with Tony Dayton in a parking garage at the time. Unable to reach Lee, I figured we should press on and attack the boat before reinforcements arrived, and Pete Samuelson agreed. Both Lee and Tony Dayton were looking to make a deal. He wanted me, and she wanted McKnight's head, offering up to $1 million. He explained that McKnight was looking to buy a tactical nuclear bomb from the Russians, but he knew her true intentions were revenge. Things were worse than McKnight had let on. It turned out Lee's father had been decapitated, and the video sent to her. They both agreed to the deal, and Lee revealed my and Pete Samuelson's location. The 2 of us were scouting the boat and anticipated heavy resistance. Pete Samuelson tried calling Lee again, but still couldn't get through. We were also running low on ammo, and I gave Pete Samuelson the option of retreating, but he thought taking out McKnight would be doing the world a favor. Then, the 2 of us proceeded into the boat, weapons at the ready. We carefully cleared the upper deck until we came to a hatch, where we killed one guy inside and took down another who was rushing us. The pained man explained that Tony Dayton knew we were there, so Pete Samuelson finished him off. We tried to retreat, but were quickly pinned down by Tony Dayton and his men who were pouring gunfire on us. The gunfire was intense, and Pete Samuelson and I started covering each other, trying to get out of the ambush. I managed to get to full cover, but Pete Samuelson was pinned down by fire from all sides. While I urged him to move, Tony Dayton even started to mock him, so Pete Samuelson went mad and stepped out, firing until he ran out of ammunition, and Tony Dayton pointed his gun at him. Instead of killing Pete Samuelson immediately, he disarmed him and dropped his own gun. wanting a hand-to-hand fight to see who was the best. Both drew knives, but Pete Samuelson easily overpowered him. In the end, Tony Dighton simply shot him dead with a concealed gun. Tony Dighton then took Pete Samuelson's radio, mocking me that I would be next. I managed to escape the scene, returned to my car, and drove off. Pete Samuelson's death was a real blow to me, and I went mad in the car. Tony Dighton returned to McKnight, who was furious that he had let me interfere with his deal, now at risk. But he promised to resolve all issues despite McKnight's disrespect, and left 2 guards with him. McKnight calmed down, then told Tony Dighton to deal with Lee after he was finished with me. I received a message from Lee and went to her office. There, I told her about Pete Samuelson's death, wondering how Tony Dighton knew our location, but Lee lied that he had extracted the information from one of her men. I agreed to complete the mission but wanted to withdraw afterward, and Lee tried to manipulate me into staying, saying I was fighting to protect my country against a terrorist and that it was my duty. I no longer cared about the mission when I remembered an incident on a trip to the Middle East, where I and 2 other Marines were separated from our unit and encountered 3 old men and a boy in a cave. We had asked the terrified locals to help us out of town, promising not to harm them, but ended up killing them as soon as we were out. Lee said I did what had to be done, but I just wanted to finish the mission and disappear. Lee had her technician try to hack TJD's server, and when that failed, she tracked down Tony Dighton's family. I didn't want to drag them into this, but Lee threatened that I wouldn't see my family if I didn't comply. All the while, Tony Dighton was waiting for an update from Lee, and as soon as I set off, she informed Tony Dighton and sent him my car's code, which they used to start tracking. Now that they had locked onto my car's signal, Tony Dighton signaled, and his masked men began closing in. Meanwhile, I just felt something was off and started preparing myself for any eventuality. I drove into a tunnel, but soon realized 2 cars were closing in from both directions. Before I could react, the occupants disabled my car, blocked my path, and launched their attack. But I was ready and fought back, taking down both teams. I forced the survivor into his car, then used his phone to get Tony Dighton's location at the warehouse. Tony Dighton confirmed to Lee that I was dealt with, and he was also on his way to kill McKnight, who was also at the warehouse. McKnight was meeting Russian partners to buy nuclear warheads. While the deal was underway, Tony Dighton and his men arrived at what they thought was the drop point with heavy weaponry, only to be shocked to find the place empty with 2 of his men dead. I knew Lee had set me up and asked the hostage for details, but he refused to talk. At the warehouse, Lee also showed up and realized they had lost McKnight, and I was still alive. She then received a call from McKnight, who asked her to put him on speaker. He revealed he knew they had tried to set him up and told Tony Dighton that Lee would pin all the blame on him in front of her boss before she took responsibility for not killing him. He taunted that Tony Dighton's only way out now was to kill Lee, and before they could trace the phone, he ditched it. The room became tense, and Lee warned her men to think carefully, but Tony Dighton didn't harm her. Instead, he had his men stationed at the hotel pressure McKnight's technician for his location before killing him. Tony Dighton soon received the information, but Lee didn't want to take chances and aimed her gun at one of his men. Just then, I entered the shed, pointing my gun at another guy, but it ended up being the prelude to a brutal knife fight between me and Tony Dighton, both of us armed with knives. Meanwhile, Lee was fighting for her life, but managed to kill her attacker. Tony Dighton and I were still locked in combat, but I gained the upper hand, eventually killing Tony Dighton with his own knife. Lee and I left the shed together. She tried to talk to me, but I didn't want to hear her excuses for why she betrayed me. Meanwhile, McKnight arrived at his private hangar, but his plane was late. Lee and I soon arrived at the airfield, and I told her to clear the airspace because we were taking McKnight's plane. Then, I armed myself and moved alone towards the airfield through the woods, where I saw McKnight's plane about to land. I infiltrated the hangar from the rear and found McKnight walking out to meet the plane. I planted a bomb, then blew up the guards inside the hangar after a brief shootout. Then, I ran and shot at McKnight's car. McKnight managed to get to his plane, and it began to take off. I then shot down the remaining guys from the shadows before jumping into a van and blocking the plane's runway, forcing it to stop. I was about to open fire when another car tried to ram me, but I narrowly avoided it. McKnight shot at me and tried to escape, but Lee emerged from the shadows and shot him. McKnight shot back, hitting Lee before I finished him off. I went to Lee, and she died after asking if I had taken down McKnight. I left her, got on the plane with the nuclear warhead, and ordered the pilot to take off. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more movie summaries like this. See you in the next video. Goodbye.